Remember at the end of The Return of the King, everyone jokes that it had too many endings, but then nobody really wanted Return of the King to end either. And when it did end, I sort of had this empty feeling inside me. I had become so invested in these characters, their struggles, their goals, their relationships. The ending almost upset me because the story was so good. How could it coming to an end ever satisfy me? How could I ever be prepared to say goodbye to these characters whom I've gotten to know for 11 hours? Now, for the season finale of Game of Thrones, I also had this sort of empty feeling inside me, but for a very different reason. It was a feeling of, well, that's the end of the greatest pop culture disappointment of my generation. Not really sure what I should do with myself now. I wasn't satisfied by the ending, but it wasn't because I wanted the story to go on, it's because the ending wasn't satisfying. And I couldn't sit there and feel sad about leaving these characters whom I've grown to understand and love for 73 hours, since for the final 33 of those hours, I've been slowly saying goodbye to the characters that I love, as I've seen their personalities butchered with shitty writing or killed off in unbelievable plot contrivances. And don't get me wrong, Season 5 and 6 were not that bad. Season 7 was when it started to get bad, and Season 8 has just been awful. I do have a few highlights for the finale though, which I will list now in order of how much I love them. In number 3, I have Arya saying that she's going to explore west of Westeros. I love this because she's just probably going to die. The show acts like we're supposed to think this translates to her being a great explorer, but many people have travelled west of Westeros according to canon. Indeed, just logically it makes sense that people before Arya will have tried to travel west of Westeros. However, if west of Westeros has not been mapped out, that suggests expeditions have been very unsuccessful. There is nothing about Arya that suggests she will buck the trend. In other words, this final scene with her and her ships, they're just going to end up lost at sea and they'll probably all die of scurvy. But more to the point, what does this have to do with Arya's character? She's an assassin who can change faces, not an explorer. In my number 2 slot, I have Dany literally not comprehending that she's done something horrible. See, as I see it, they could have played this 3 ways. She could have coldly said that she needs to send a message to any city that stands against her, and that's why she didn't show mercy. Or she could act as if she was crazy in that moment, but has since realised that she's done something horrible. Or they could have just written her so she's genuinely snapped and is full on insane. But instead, they have her make an argument that it was Cersei's fault for forcing her to kill the civilians, which doesn't make sense. They were surrendering. Now, maybe Dany's incoherent argument is supposed to simulate madness, but it doesn't do that. It just makes her look really dumb more than anything, like she doesn't know what surrendering means. Or maybe when Tyrion was stressing that if they ring the bells, it means they've surrendered, maybe she was distracted. Maybe she was thinking back to her favourite episode in Season 2.
They're welcoming the new king.
I've never known bells to mean surrender. They want to play music with us, let's play.
But at number 1 we have my favourite thing in this episode. Tyrion finds Jaime and Cersei's bodies and starts crying, and it is the funniest thing I've ever seen. Because firstly, there's literally 1 layer of bricks on top of them, even though in the last episode it looked like the entire structure was collapsing on them. But I guess Jaime could have just held his hands up over them, and they'd probably have been alright. I mean, his arms would be a bit sore, but a single layer of bricks is only going to kill you if it hits you right on the head. Honestly, a helmet would have done the trick. But then on top of that, the pile is actually just a very small pile in the middle of the room. So they really could have just stepped to one side and been alright. Again, the last episode had this sense that their deaths were inevitable as the entire building collapsed upon them, burying them forever. But in reality, nope. If they would have just held their hands up to shield them from a single layer of bricks or just stood in a slightly different position, then they'd be fine. Tyrion would come down just to see Cersei and Jaime chilling with a small pile of bricks next to them. So yeah, props to Dinklage's acting, but I really enjoyed how funny this scene was. But really, I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about the top 10 worst offences of Game of Thrones. This includes both arguments people make for why the show is good, and also arguments against people who say the show is bad. And it's going to be a numbered list to some degree, so wait until the end to see my favourite worst argument. Number 10, the people who dislike this season are all right-wing trolls. Okay, so firstly, no. But secondly, I don't even understand where this argument comes from. Like, this whole accusation that people only dislike a show or film because they're right-wing started with Ghostbusters. And okay, fine, it's got women in it, so I can see the logic there. Then there was Star Wars Episode 8, where there's this whole character arc about how this white dude needs to stop undermining his female commanders. That's tenuous, but okay. And then there's Game of Thrones, and I have to ask, what would right-wingers even be mad about? Now, even if there was something for right-wingers to be angry at, that still wouldn't prove that's the only reason people dislike it. But yeah, I've seen this argument made an embarrassing number of times. I should say most of these arguments are based on comments I've seen from the Game of Thrones subreddit, the Song of Ice and Fire Circle Jerk subreddit, and Twitter. Right-wing trolls seems to have become a reflexive way to shut down criticism of a series or film, and if anything it's kind of an unhelpful thing to say. You're literally positioning right-wingers as the only people with discerning taste when it comes to media. No, you can dislike this crap regardless of your political position. Number 9. The effects and the cinematography were amazing. This is true, so that's why it's relatively low on the list. However, really obvious response here. Effects and cinematography are a tool, and therefore it matters what you do with that tool. And when it comes to fantasy storytelling, I'd rather have flat, boring cinematography with a really compelling plot than fantastic, mind-blowing cinematography with a boring and stupid plot. And sure, the effects are good, but I'd rather they use their effects budget more intelligently than just having this gratuitous destruction of King's Landing. Maybe they could even light up episode 3 a bit more so we could actually see what's going on. Number 8. Sometimes characters relapse in their character arcs. So for context, this is a common defense of Jaime's character. See, Jaime started off really arrogant and, child murdery, but then during season 3, we actually came to understand him and relate to him. We learned that the reason he killed the Mad King Aerys was because Aerys was on the brink of murdering all the innocents in the city with wildfire. As we come to relate to Jaime, we begin to see Cersei getting more and more evil. So obviously at the end of season 6, when Cersei blows up the set with wildfire, you'd think Jaime would be realizing that he needs to kill his sister, just as with Aerys, or at least that, unable to kill her, he would leave. But nope, instead, during season 7, he literally falls into some weird stasis for the entire season, and then only leaves at the very end. And then finally, he arrives to team up with the good guys. He has a heartwarming moment where he knights Brienne of Tarth, and then they both survive the big zombie battle. Subsequent to this, they sleep together, but then that very night, Jaime leaves because he wants to see his sister. Now, some Season 8 defenders will claim that we didn't like the scene because we wanted Jaime to end up with Brienne. This isn't true. I think most people who dislike Season 8 were actually very happy with Brienne and Jaime being a platonic relationship. Having Brienne find love when she is supposed to be very ugly feels a bit too much like The Hunchback of Notre Dame 2. I should say that Brienne in the show isn't unattractive, nor is the actress. However, we as an audience are told she is. Anyway, the real debate is over Jaime going back to Cersei. Detractors say that it's kind of shit because Jaime has been moving away from Cersei for 6 seasons at this point, and at the start of this very episode, it didn't seem like he was having any trouble about this newfound allegiance, but suddenly he switches sides. However, defenders say that, you know what, sometimes characters try their best to become better people. They try to improve, they try to shake their old habits, but ultimately they fail. Now let me make this clear. That's not necessarily wrong. It's not a problem if Jaime does relapse. It's not a problem if Jaime gets so close to escaping his love for his sister, but ultimately he gives in and finds himself going back to her at the end. The problem is that Jaime was in limbo for 6 seasons. He was becoming a better person while struggling to reconcile that to his love for his sister. Jaime was truly redeemed for 3.5 episodes. That's how long he was actively battling for the good guys in opposition to Cersei. And then he went from redeemed to wanting to go back to Cersei again in the space of 1 scene. Oh, and let's not forget the fact that in the next episode after that, he declares that he never really cared for innocent people, thus contradicting a really established part of his character. Now sure, if Jaime would have switched sides earlier, and we would have seen some evidence of his doubts, then I'd have forgiven him ultimately going back to Cersei. But just as we need character development to show him abandoning Cersei, we need character development to show him returning back to her. And lots of Season 8 defenders make fun of people who thought that Jaime was going back to kill Cersei, but they were doing that to try and make Jaime's actions make more sense. For the record, if Jaime had gone to kill Cersei, and then at the last minute realised he couldn't, and relapsed in that sense, that would have been fine. There are plenty of good ways you could have had a redemption arc, where at the end the character relapses, without it feeling like you've just thrown the redemption arc down the drain. Ultimately though, this is an example of how not to do that. Number 7. You're just mad because the Night King's death wasn't epic enough. This is an argument used to imply that people who are angry about the Night King's death must just be angry that they didn't get their epic fan service. Now, that would be fine if it weren't for the fact that this season also gave us fucking Clegane Bowl. And you know what? If I could rewrite Game of Thrones, Clegane Bowl wouldn't have happened. The Hound would have died in season 4 when he was abandoned by Arya. So don't tell me I'm throwing my toys out of the pram because I didn't get my dose of epicness. My Sandor Clegane died from slowly bleeding out after taking a tumble down a hill. Season 8's Sandor Clegane died after pushing his giant zombie brother through a collapsing building into a chasm of fire below. Also, I'm just going to say this, in the eyes of many people, the Night King's death by Arya was epic. Arya, the epic badass assassin, kills the Night King. And the problem with the Night King's death isn't that it's insufficiently epic. The problem is that it's dumb. We have this huge battle between zombies and men. The characters make some really stupid decisions throughout the battle. The zombies are about to get a well-earned victory for not being fucking morons, and then Arya fucking trampolines in, out of nowhere, and just stabs the Night King, causing all his army to magically die. So number one, the entire battle is now kind of pointless since the army was literally just annihilated with magic. Number two, the Night King feels like he was never really a significant threat in the first place now. And number three, we don't really know how he was killed apart from magic trampolines, so his death doesn't feel earned. Seeing a clear and intelligent plan to defeat the Night King would have felt much more satisfying. So who should have killed the Night King? Some say Jon Snow. I disagree because I think Jon Snow shouldn't have even made it to season 8. I think he should have been killed by an unnamed soldier in the Battle of the Bastards. Just get killed in the melee. So yeah, just more evidence that I don't expect all my characters to have awesome epic deaths. But more to the point, any conventional weapon against the Night King would feel unearned, so he should have been killed by Bran. Because, I'm going to say it right now, I love seasons 1 to 4, but those Bran scenes were all kind of tedious. I couldn't help but feel a bit disappointed that rather than the intricate and multifaceted conflicts of King's Landing, we were going to watch some kid learn to become a bird. But I said to myself, it's fine, because this will pay off. I can go back and look at it and say, yes, it wasn't massively interesting at the time, but since Bran proved to be important, I can get some enjoyment out of watching his growth. And of course, Bran vs the Night King would make the Night King feel powerful. He wouldn't just be killed by a cheeky little shank, he'd be killed in some weird magical mental world by the boy who he's been enthusiastically pursuing for a long time now. Now in some sense, yes, that would be more epic, but it would also make more sense. And it would be epic in a way that's different from just, oh shit man, the Night King just got stabbed by Arya and she jumped in and it was so cool and he grabbed her but then she dropped the knife and then she caught it and stabbed him. The Night King seems to be this powerful primordial force of nature, which also seems to be what Bran taps into. That's what I want to see, not fucking Arya, who would also be dead at this point in my rewrite by the way. Number 6, the Night King's character doesn't matter. So one of the defenses people have for the Night King's disappointing death is to say the Night King didn't matter. He was just a generic bad dude. The real villain was Cersei. First of all, even if this was true, Game of Thrones has given us plenty of satisfying conclusions to minor antagonists. Second of all, we've had two distinct stories leading up to this in the form of Jon Snow's story and Bran's story, so the end result of two entire storylines better fucking matter. Oh, and the entire series begins with a tease for the White Walkers, so when you rewatch this series, that opening scene is going to be a reminder of why rewatching it might be a pretty disappointing experience. In terms of more substantial criticisms, the fact that the Night King always seemed a bit one-dimensional was a problem that D&D should have been aware of from the start, and they should have tried to fix that. The Night King presents the biggest threat in the series. He has a much bigger army than Cersei. He is the second biggest murderer of the entire series behind Daenerys. Get him to work somehow. Don't just say, he's a generic baddie, what can you do? There are some defenders of Season 8 who actually mock the suggestion that the Night King should have had a clear motivation. They're completely ignoring the fact that George Martin has repeatedly stressed that he doesn't like writing generic bad guys who are just evil for evil's sake. But in their minds, the Night King being anything other than a boring Dark Lord is laughable. But more to the point, even if your whole argument is that Cersei is the bigger villain, you fucked that up too. Cersei hardly gets any screen time this season. Also, most of the screen time shows her in a substantially more sympathetic light, and at no point is she really reveling in being anything like as evil as she has been in the past. The worst thing she did last season was her revenge on Ilaria Sand, and even then, she had rather sympathetic motives. She was played to be slightly broken at that point through some fantastic acting, and many people were beginning to sympathise with her. And honestly, by season 8, this show had managed to achieve something incredible. I wasn't that enthusiastic to see Cersei die. From season 1 to season 6, I'd have ran around the house screaming with joy if she'd have died. But in the space of 2 short seasons, you were able to totally neutralise my enthusiasm for her as a villain. 5. Sometimes characters make stupid decisions, so it's realistic. So when you point out that characters in this season have often made stupid decisions, you are met with 2 responses. Either you're told that characters in past seasons have made stupid decisions, or you are told that people in real life make stupid decisions. So it's just realistic that stupid decisions are made. Now, there are 2 ways that people make stupid decisions in this season that really bother me. The first is really stupid battle tactics. Here's the problem. Battle tactics take a lot of time to come up with. A group of people sit around and think, what is the best way to defeat our enemies? Therefore, if the methods they come up with are so stupid that anybody could pick up on how little sense they make, that's the problem. I could pick so many examples from the last 2 seasons, but Battle of Winterfell. 1. The Dothraki are in the front lines despite not having weapons capable of killing zombies until Melisandre shows up, which nobody could have predicted, so why were they in the front line? 2. The Dothraki charge right into the middle of the zombies, despite the main strength of light cavalry being their ability to harass armies by riding in and then quickly riding off. 3. The trebuchets don't start firing until after the Dothraki have already started charging. 4. The dragons aren't used until after the Dothraki have already been killed. 5. The trebuchets are at the front of the army, so they are quickly destroyed, rather than being at the back of the army or in the castle itself. 6. The Unsullied use a phalanx formation with spears, despite such a formation being best used for taking on another well-drilled army, not for taking on mindless hordes who will just swamp you before you can get many thrusts in. 7. Their army is not in the castle. By the time the zombies do reach the castle, the walls are very undefended, because most of the people who could have been defending the walls have already been killed. And that's all from one battle. And outside of that battle, we have Dany sort of forgot about the Iron Fleet. I've genuinely seen people try to dismiss this by saying, well, you know, Oberyn was pretty stupid when he taunted the mountain instead of just killing him right away. But here's the thing, Oberyn was angry. Oberyn was confronting the man who raped and murdered his sister. Oberyn didn't sit around with a bunch of advisors and craft a plan to kill the mountain in the most efficient way possible. And this is pretty much the same story for every other stupid decision people bring up in the first 4 seasons. It's people who were acting alone in the heat of the moment, or would have been acting on strong emotions. There is no comparison. The second kind of stupid decisions we get are decisions from the characters who should be smart. Littlefinger, Varys and Tyrion. I will also throw Sansa into the mix. I believe that Sansa should have been written as a new Littlefinger, somebody who has learned to play the game and has a plan up her sleeve. So if I just dip into season 7 for a bit, fucking Littlefinger. Littlefinger's whole scheme in season 7 is so stupid just to culminate in a stupid shock reveal wherein we find out that basically just everyone knew his sneaky plan all along. This was a sign of a beginning of the end for these smart characters. And of course, in season 8 we have Varys not knowing that Jon was a Targaryen, despite being written as somebody who knows everything, and then after conspiring for all of half an episode he gets caught and burned alive. And then we have Tyrion, who makes so many stupid decisions in the last 2 and a bit seasons that I can't even be bothered to list them. And then we have Sansa, who doesn't do anything sneaky at all. She makes it clear that she hates Daenerys, and that's it. No intelligent effort to undermine her or anything beyond simply saying, I hate her, she sucks, she's not my queen. For some contrast, I mentioned how in my version of Game of Thrones, Arya is dead. This is because Littlefinger tricks her into wearing his face and then kills her, and uses her dead body, which of course looks like him, in order to essentially fake his own death. So rather than Littlefinger being a blithering idiot who gets handily thwarted by Sansa and Arya, he is able to trick Arya and profit from it considerably. And in my version, Varys knew that Jon was a Targaryen from pretty much the beginning. When he backed Daenerys in season 5, he already knew she'd be a bad ruler and was only wanting to use her for her armies so he could defeat the ruling powers of Westeros. He constantly held all the cards in his hands, and when Jon Snow dies in season 6 at the Battle of the Bastards, he begins to conspire with Sansa to ensure that she will sit on the throne at the end, having learned to play the game. Now, you cannot like that, but in both cases we have characters who are supposed to be smart, showing that they are able to trick and always have the upper hand over those they oppose, rather than being comfortably outmaneuvered. In these cases, the problem of the characters making such stupid decisions is that it is out of character for characters who have been previously shown as very intelligent. So yes, sometimes characters make stupid decisions, sometimes people make stupid decisions, but the stupid decisions in the earlier seasons are not comparable to the stupid decisions in the later seasons. Number 4. Daenerys' turn to evil was foreshadowed. You'll notice how in the last point I said of Varys, when he backed Daenerys in season 5, he already knew she'd be a bad ruler and was only wanting to use her for her armies. Now contained in there is the assumption that Daenerys would be a bad ruler, and I have always felt this. She has very unrealistic expectations of what it would be like to win a victory, expecting there to be no civilian casualties or inhumane behaviour by her side. She is very keen to destabilise established traditions in the interests of her own rigid view of morality, and she fails to show mercy when it would be politically advantageous for her to do so. On this final point, she watches with indifference as her brother is horribly murdered. She doesn't plead for his life, or ask that he go into exile, or be imprisoned. She doesn't even want to look away. And as her brother lies dead after suffering his horrible fate, she dismisses it by simply pointing out that he can't have been intended to be a true ruler. She also burns a witch alive, explicitly saying that she wants to hear her screams. She kills some people via entombment, including a close friend of hers, who may very well have been threatened or manipulated. She burns a man alive after making a fair trade with him, and she starts indiscriminately killing masters of Meereen because some of them are rebelling against her. In short, Daenerys consistently fails to play the diplomatic game. She fails to really convince people of her side. Instead, her only play is to declare all must kneel to her or burn. More to the point, Daenerys is inherently too powerful even for a good ruler. A dragon gives her huge amounts of power, and huge amounts of power can easily corrupt somebody. It's simply safer to kill her before she has established herself as a ruler, or else wait until it's potentially too late. And yet, despite this, her killing hundreds of thousands of civilians at King's Landing is so out of character and dumb. I was laughing as Emilia Clarke was pulling that stupid face. To be fair to her, probably doing the best she could to sell this absolutely ridiculous turn for this character. Do you know what this is like? Anakin Skywalker, Revenge of the Sith. You see, it's established that Anakin is upset about losing his mother. It's established that he wants to be so powerful, he can stop people from dying. It's established that he is willing to kill out of revenge for the deaths of his loved ones. However, none of this justifies the fact that he storms the Jedi Temple and kills the children inside. The same goes for Daenerys. Just because you've established that she might have a dark side to her, it doesn't justify having her doing something more destructive and callous than any other character in the series so far. It's literally like when the bell starts ringing, it took the writers by surprise, and D&D started saying, oh shit, the war's over, but we haven't finished the Mad Queen story arc, we haven't done all the character development, fuck it, have her go crazy for some reason. That's what's going on as Daenerys is pulling her face. The writers are trying to make this work before deciding just fuck it, have her go crazy. And again, in my version, Daenerys would be assassinated by Varys before she had the opportunity to go Mad Queen. There would be some indications throughout the later seasons that she might go Mad Queen, just as there were in the earlier seasons. However, ultimately, the question of whether she would have been a good ruler with a bit of a temper, or an awful ruler who would tear Westeros apart, would be open-ended. Aerys took a long time to become mad after he had absolute power. If you're going to invoke the Mad King Aerys with the Mad Queen story arc, maybe pick up on the fact that Aerys took a long time to become mad. It can't just happen pretty much on the dime. I wasn't a huge fan of Daenerys at the beginning of Season 8, but she was so far from mad and a light year away from murdering civilians in cold blood. And again, a lot of Season 8 defenders seem to think that Season 8 detractors think Daenerys was fantastic with no character flaws. Now, while I'm sure a lot of Season 8 detractors are Team Daenerys, I am very much in Team Kill Daenerys, and always have been, but even I didn't think she was capable of this. Number 3. It subverted your expectations. Last Jedi memes aside, Game of Thrones has always had a reputation for surprising us, whether it was Ned's death in Season 1, Stannis coming out of nowhere in Season 2 and seriously impacting the plot, or of course the Red Wedding in Season 3. However, this shouldn't be taken as just surprising equals good. There is ultimately a spectrum of stories. On the one hand are the conventional stories. On the other hand is some hypothetical, maximally unconventional story. Now, most stories lie towards the more conventional side, but almost all stories will deviate from it slightly. You do get some stories which deviate from it a lot, and often those stories are pretty good, because they surprise you. However, it would be a mistake to think that this alone makes a good story, and moving a story too far from conventional storytelling causes you to reach a point where the plot is no longer entertaining and fulfilling. There's a reason why there are conventions when it comes to storytelling. It's because it works. But of course, you can have too much of a good thing. So that's why you need to break the mold every now and then. And it can be refreshing to see a story which breaks the mold in lots of different ways. However, stray too far, with too little skill to find fulfilling conclusions outside of the beaten path, and you end up with shit. So don't tell me that it isn't shit because it subverted expectations. If anything, subverting expectations makes it more likely to be shit. Saying the story isn't shit because it subverted expectations is like saying a meal will be tasty because you didn't use a recipe. Yes, a very skilled chef can deviate from a recipe and produce something very nice, but deviating from a recipe doesn't guarantee quality, and if the chef is very unskilled, then the resulting meal will probably be worse for it. 2. The ending was bittersweet. This is often added with an implied, you probably just wanted a Disney-fied ending, you loser. Do you know how my Game of Thrones would end? You can see how it would end because I made a prediction video back before Season 8 started. But basically, Daenerys would have defeated her enemies, she'd have finally achieved victory, and then suddenly boom, she'd be stabbed by one of Varys' assassins. Meanwhile, we cut to Varys having a bit of a sinister monologue, and we'd see some soldiers pointing ballistae, which I have realised is the proper plural of ballista since my earlier video, at Drogon, and putting him down execution style, echoing the death of Robb's pet wolf at the Red Wedding. Sansa would return to King's Landing as queen, with an open-ended question about whether she might just be a new Cersei, having become so good at playing the game. There would also be the question of whether Dany truly would have been a bad queen, or was she just killed because a foreign queen would be seen as politically unviable. There would be some room for hope, with Tyrion pushing for a bit more democratization to provide some checks to power. However, all in all, the story would be significantly more miserable. So don't tell me that I hated the ending because it was too bittersweet and I just wanted a nice happy ending where the baddies were defeated and everything is perfect at the end. Nobody wanted that. The problem with this season isn't that it was too dark. The problem is that it was shit. Now, I would prefer a competent, happier ending over this crap, but overall I was expecting and hoping to enjoy an ending that would challenge me by not giving me the happy ending that we usually get with fantasy adventure stories. Instead, we got an ending that wasn't that dark or that happy, it was just thoroughly boring. And finally, we have my number 1 worst defense of Game of Thrones Season 8. You couldn't have done any better. I've given some pretty clear ideas of what I would have done differently, and I firmly do believe that my changes would make this season considerably better. And while I'm sure not everyone would end the series the same way that I would, I think plenty of people would agree that at least the few changes I made would be a substantial improvement. See, as something of a fantasy writer myself, I find the hardest part of writing is to come up with settings and characters. Coming up with places that are interesting and varied personalities that feel believable can be a real challenge. And it has to be said, once you've got those two things established, everything else should fall into place to some extent. In that sense, D&D have an enviable opportunity. The fantastic characters were already there. The setting was already perfected. The intricate lore laid out in the thousands of already existing pages. And they had the freedom to decide how they wanted this story to end. And not just in the way I someday plan on this channel by laying out my improved version of the show, but in a way that would be considered canon by the millions of people who would never read the books. In fact, the one good thing you can say about this season is it will probably inspire people to read the books to actually get a decent story. So don't say that D&D should be cut any slack. Don't say that they did the best they could to finish the show without the books as a guideline. I would say most broad ideas I've seen for how the show should have ended have satisfied me a great deal more than the broad strokes that we got from D&D. And even ignoring that, there are small things. Somebody on Reddit in the immediate aftermath of episode 5 proposed an alternative scenario for Daenerys' turn. As the bells ring in surrender, Cersei commands all the Ballistae to fire on the now dormant Rhaegal. This would fix two problems at once. It would allow Daenerys to have a more manageable number of dragons in the finale without having Rhaegal be shot out of the sky while flying at a high altitude, with the dragon being much more plausibly doing nothing when it is shot. And then it would make sense that Dany would respond to this with violence, since the truce has just been betrayed and exploited by Cersei. And heck, it would also make Cersei seem more evil, which was sorely lacking this season. And there we go, one solution to 3 major problems this season, and some guy on Reddit came up with that in a day. If just one random dude on Reddit can do that in a day, don't say that there aren't many people who could have done better with a team of writers and years to be honing how they wanted the final season of the show to play out. And that's it. Those are the top 10 worst defenses of Season 8, but coming up at some point I will be reviewing the entire Game of Thrones series and then topping that off with my rewrite of Season 5 onwards. So if you found some of the ideas interesting here, then please do like, subscribe and share. It's going to be a big project that I want to be successful, so I'm hoping to have a decent number of subscribers before I start. So if you want that sort of high effort content sooner, share this video any way you can. Apart from that, leave a comment below telling me your thoughts, follow me on Twitter for the occasional tweet, and also give on Patreon if you think what I'm doing is worth $1 or $2. Until next time, thank you for watching. Thank you to my current patrons: Hannah Taylor, LRX89, Stephen, Kirsten, Nancy Diamond, Stephen Lester, Rosemary Furman, and Eric Hernandez. You're all very appreciated.
Do it! Just do it! Yes, you can!